Hi, this is Mr. Tomlinson. This is Chapter 18 or Chapter 8, Regression Wisdom, Day 15. I love these little stats, humor. I used to think correlation implied causations. Then I took a statistics class. Now I don't. Sounds like the class helped. Well, maybe. This one speaks for itself. Pause the video if you want to look at it. And if you get married, then yesterday you had 0 husbands. Today you have 1. That means by sometime next year you'll have 48 new husbands. So you better get a bulk rate on a wedding cake. Yeah, oh, I hear crickets. Okay, so when you look at a regression line, this is this line, blue line, is represented by all of the blue points without this red point. Okay. The red line shows what happens, what this red point, what it can do to a regression analysis. Now, some might call this point an influential point. However, I'm not sure I would call this one an influential point. It does have a pull on this slope of this regression line, but I wouldn't say it's overly substantial. It's still positive, but again, this point does have an impact. We can't ignore it. It's always here. We can't just go, I'm going to put my thumb over this and pretend it doesn't exist. You can't do that. You cannot ignore these points. This is what we call a point that has a large, it's an outlier. It's far away, okay, and it has a significantly large residual. It can have an impact on the regression line, but in this case, I'm not sure I would call it influential. It's a large outlier. It's a point with a large outlier. So the linear model doesn't really fit with these points, okay, with large residuals very well, and they seem to be different from the other cases. So it looked like, and you notice here that this point with this large residual away from the regression line, we can't just, like I said, we just can't ignore it, okay? It doesn't fit with the pattern of this data. The general pattern of this data is here, but this one point, this in this case, I think it's votes for Ralph Nader versus votes for Pat Buchanan, and this was a classic case from Florida during the Bush-Gore election, and that's why it was quite controversial, because this point was so far away from all the other counties in Florida. But so you can't ignore it. You must pay attention to it. Now, a data point can be really unusual if its x value is far away from the mean of the x values. And these points are thought to be, or are said to be called points of high leverage. Okay, high leverage, okay, does not mean influential necessarily. Okay, there's a difference between leverage and being influential. Now, a point with high leverage has the potential to change the regression line, and we say that a point is influential if we take it away. The analysis, the model would be very, very different. Okay, I said very twice, but if the model is very different, in fact, in some cases, it can change the entire slope of the line. So influential or leverage points, high leverage points, have the potential to change everything about your model. Here's an example of what we call the shoe size example. It's in the book, they kind of give a humorous example. They say, what if you had a group of people and you took their shoe size and you measured their IQ? Well, in general, this is what you'd have. A bunch of people, some people are high IQ, small shoe size, some people have big shoe sizes and small IQs. But it is said that Bozo the Clown was a genius, and he also had like a size 25 foot. So if you add Bozo up here, okay, then Bozo can have a tremendous influence on the regression line. If we looked at this without Bozo, then what we'd have is no relationship, no association between these two variables. And this means our slope would be 0 and there'd be no relationship. But because Bozo's put in there, it has a dramatic influence on the line. And so not only is this point far away, if we think about X bar, this is the mean shoe size, the width of the shoe. the mean length of the shoe, excuse me. And then what we have is this point bozo is really far away from the mean. This means it's a high leverage point. High leverage. Now, because it changes the regression line from this slope to this slope, so we're going from the black line to the red line, then it's also influential. So it's not only high leverage, it's also influential. Now, let's say bozo was actually a little slower on the uptake, then if he was down here, then what we'd have is this line being pulled down here. So one single point in a whole group of points can make your regression line go from a horizontal line, no association, okay, to a downward slope line. Now, when we investigate these unusual points, we might learn something that we didn't really expect to learn. Okay, you might look at this point, this influential point out here, and just think, whoa, there's something going on here, and we can learn something that we didn't learn just from looking at the main body of the data. Okay, and again, you can't just put your thumb over it and pretend, you can't just look the other way, this doesn't exist. No, you have to look at it. But what you can do, especially if you're talking about this in terms of a scientific report, is you can discuss the regression line with the point omitted and with the point. And then you can talk about what influence this point had on this. It's not only influential, it's also high leverage. So it did have a dramatic impact on the slope of this regression line and pulled it towards this point. Now, here we have an outlier over here to the right. This outlier is going to have an impact on this regression analysis. However, because there's so many points that are really straight right on this line, it's not going to be dramatic enough to be influential. But it is a point of a high residual. And again, we can't ignore it, can't just ignore it. We have to make sure we take this into account. Now, influential points can hide in your plot of residuals. You won't see it in the residuals, so you've got to make sure that you look at the scatter plot every time. Okay, so when you look at the scatter plot, that's going to give you sort of an indicator that you have influential points, large residuals, or points of high leverage. Okay, again, points of high leverage can pull the line close to it, and so often you'll see a small residual. Okay, so if you think about this bozo example, I'm not putting any context in this, but you can see the line just being pulled directly to this high leverage influential point. And so it's hard to see if you just looked at the residuals. The residual of this point is going to be right next to the line here, and it's just going to look like another small residual, even though it is far away from the other x's. So if you plot the x values against the residual, the error, then what you're going to end up showing here is this value here is really close to 0, but it doesn't sort of display the power it's having on the regression analysis. So you'll see influential points in the scatter plot. So make sure you look at them, okay?